Hello, and welcome to Book Solid, New Canaan Library's podcast for young adults, new adults, and the forever young adult at heart. I'm your host, Kathleen, a collections librarian.
And I'm your co-host, James, an adult services librarian. And with us today is our special guest, Kat.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Kat is one of our children's librarians and resident Babel enthusiast.
That's right, I pushed this book into everyone's hands, so it's pretty much my fault that you're listening to this podcast right now.
All right, so we are doing Babel by R.F. Kuang. Probably should have said that first. James, why don't you tell us what that's about?
Sure. So this is the book introduction kind of summary taken from the author's website. It is 1828. Robin Swift, orphaned by cholera in Canaan, is brought to London by the mysterious Professor Lovell. There he trains for years in Latin, ancient Greek, and Chinese, all in preparation for the day he'll enroll in Oxford University's prestigious Royal Institute of Translation, also known as Babel. Babel's the world's center of translation and, more importantly, of silverworking, the art of manifesting the meaning lost in translation through enchanted silver bars to magical effect. Silverworking has made the British Empire unparalleled in power, and Babel's research in foreign languages serves the Empire's quest to colonize everything it encounters. Oxford, the city of dreaming spires, is a fairy tale for Robin, a utopia dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. But knowledge serves power, and for Robin, a Chinese boy raised in Britain, serving Babel inevitably means betraying his motherland. As his studies progress, Robin finds himself caught between Babel and the shadowy Hermes Society, an organization dedicated to sabotaging the silverworking that supports imperial expansion. When Britain pursues an unjust war with China over silver and opium, Robin must decide. Can powerful institutions be changed from within, or does revolution always require violence? What is he willing to sacrifice to bring Babel down?
All right, so just before we get going, I do want to issue a spoiler warning because there are a lot of twists and turns in this book, and we are going to be talking about absolutely everything.
Everything.
So if you have not finished Babel yet, take just, a few hours, couple of weeks. It's 500 pages, and come back when you're done.
And when you're done, you'll be listening to us starting our conversation, talking about... Actually, let's first start with what we thought about this book. Kathleen, this is another book with fantasy elements in it. What did you think about this one?
So I think all of this is a test to see, will I continue doing this podcast where all we talk about is fantasy all the time? But I actually really loved this book, and I felt like it was right up my alley, surprisingly. So I am so excited to talk about it. There were so many things with the historical elements, the fantasy elements, the way it all came together, social commentary. I loved it all.
Kat, what did you think?
I really did feel like when I saw the premise of this book pre-publication, like it was made for me. It is a book fundamentally about what revolution means, what it looks like to change society, if it's possible to do so from within an institution that is doing harm, if violence is necessary. And also, it has, a bunch of rollicking twists and turns, some homoeroticism, discussions of language. It's been a great time, and I'm so happy that more people have loved it.
Yep, and I also greatly enjoyed the book. A truly incredible combination of taking historical record of the history of British imperialism and colonialism during a specific time period and melding that with an alternate fantastical kind of history that very meaningfully is in conversation with the historical record and adds something to kind of add like a metaphorical layer to it. In this specific case being translation and what it means to kind of make physical the idea of like cultural appropriation and use of resources in a way that is not so tangible in reality when that sometimes does occur. This book really does that in a very interesting way. So talking about those themes or kind of, just kind of introducing ourselves to the book. So it is a book that's interested in exploring several pretty complicated themes and some potentially politically fraught topics such as racism, prejudice, the legacy of colonialism and things like that. But when we had actually spoken about this previously, Kathleen, you had mentioned that something that you thought the book did really well was kind of introduce us to these complicated ideas through the eyes of our main characters.
Yeah, so I think that was one of the things that really spoke to me as someone who really enjoys kind of a character study, characters that you can really feel that you know a lot about and that are your pathway into the story. I think we're talking about all of these kind of complex themes, but you're really being invited into that world through the four main characters, which I think makes it both more accessible and also a lot more affecting. So the four main characters, just to have a little refresher, hopefully for everyone who has read the book, we have Robin Swift, who is coming from Canton to England with Professor Lovell, his really cool dad, as we find out later, but
more about him later. Don't worry.
More about this
The Lovell
later.
Power Hour will occur later in this podcast. Do not worry.
Get ready. But we have Robin Swift, who's kind of our initial introduction into the world of Babel and Oxford. And he meets his cohort there, Rami, who is kind of this larger-than-life, really fun character. They immediately have this really strong bond. And then we have Victoire and Letty, who we will also have some things to say about later. It's so great to see these characters because they all have a different way that they are victimized, but just a way that they are outsiders within this world, but also they find each other, and it's this beautiful found friendship story at the beginning that turns a little darker, but it's really interesting to kind of see the way that empire and colonialism, racism, patriarchy, all of these things are affecting these characters in different ways, but they also feel like real people.
Yeah, there's many moments of just like sincere connection, right? You have, and probably one of the most homoerotic moments of the book, Robin is telling Rami, Letty really likes you. She really thinks you're attractive. There's like these crushes going on. And at that moment, I actually have the quote written down because that's who I am. Rami actually cuts Robin off and says, "Don't you know why? Like, don't you know why I haven't responded to Letty?" And the text says, "Their eyes met. Robin felt a prickle at the back of his neck. The space between them felt very charged, like the moment between lightning and thunder. And Robin had no idea what was going to happen next." And so there's these very, like, college level squabbles around, like, who has a crush, people having, doing work for each other to help each other stay up with homework. And also, there's this bigger layer.
I just want to shake Robin for that scene.
Yeah, especially because, like their love never gets to become spoken. It always remains textually kind of secretive, which, given the historical nature of this book, I think was a fitting choice, even if it makes it very painful.
Yeah, there's a quote earlier on in the book talking about where Robin kind of realizes that Professor Lovell is his father. And he kind of tells himself that a lie isn't a lie if it's never spoken. How, like, if you don't acknowledge it, that's kind of sometimes what you need to do to move on and kind of operate in a way that lets you get on with your day-to-day life. And I think that, the relationship that really he never was able to have with Rami is one of the clear negative things that is kind of being enforced by the book's time period, the societal norms and what the kind of cultural place is at the time.
Yeah, to speak either of those things aloud would be to transgress profoundly against a society that already will not accept him for who he is. I rooted for Robin from the beginning because while he's such a complex character and you can really feel the ways in which he is at odds with himself in the book. Like, I wrote this moment down where he actually is thinking about a bully in Oxford, one of the white students who, like, they're not friends. They don't ever hang out. They do not interact at all. But he's open with himself in this interior monologue. He wanted Pendennis's life, Kuang writes, not so much for its material pleasures, but for what it represented, the assurance that one would always be welcome in England. He would no longer be the foreigner second-guessing his pronunciation at every turn, but a native whose belonging could not possibly be questioned or revoked. And Robin's status as an outsider, I think, makes him more willing, in some cases, not to speak, because he can't, for safety reasons.
That's a great point, and I think that really kind of highlights just how well the author does for just kind of introducing us to this story. Like, Robin is our complete introduction to the story. We meet him in Canton. His family is dying of plague, and he's introduced to magic because he's healed with a silver bar from Professor Lovell comes and heals him, and he experiences the kind of awe that this kind of resource can bring. But it's but it's in poverty. Like, this thing is such a scarce resource here. And then he's taken to Britain and to Babel, and it is in abundance. There is wealth, there is prestige, there is so much here that is that is in some aspects welcoming him in, saying, you are welcome here, you're valuable to us, and you're worthy of this. Now, culturally that might not be the case, but certainly this place is for him, this university, Babel, Oxford University, is something that is welcoming to him like nothing else ever is. So it is something where when he opens his mouth to speak, he thinks about, what did I have before this? Do I have the right to even say anything? And having these groups of friends into this place trying to find their way, it's such a great way to kind of get you into this world.
I think it's really telling that, Victoire, we don't get to hear a lot of what she experienced at Babel until later in the book, but Kuang was really thinking about very carefully how everybody's intersections of identity play into their experiences at Babel, right? So you have two men of color with Rami and Robin, you have Letty as a white woman, and you have Victoire, who is Black Haitian Creole, I believe. And how Babel treats them and how it sees their value is always dependent on those identities. And I think, what breaks the group apart ultimately, and I think this ties so brilliantly to the idea of like cultural exchange and language, is that Letty cannot fundamentally hear something different than what she has experienced. And watching that process happen in slow motion over the course of the book, when you care about these four characters, was so painful and such a smart way to construct the plot.
I think getting these insights from all these different characters and then kind of having this core group of the three of them, and I will avoid right now the main thing that kind of is solidifying them as being drawn together, but spoiler, is one of my favorite parts. But this is the part that kind of it shows the initial break with Letty where it becomes apparent that while the other characters know what's the dark side of Babel and why they would want to cut ties or sabotage, Letty's like, we've got a good thing going. I don't understand.
There's this like intensely painful moment towards, the latter half of the book after the big event that I also won't spoil. Letty confronts Victoire, or Victoire confronts Letty about Babel and its dark side. And Letty tries to brush Victoire off and be like, well, Babel donates to charity. So even if they're contributing to Empire, at least they're also doing good, right? Doesn't that even out? And Victoire says, they're making silver bars and selling them to slave traders in the US, right? Like, they're doing that because it makes them money. And Letty doesn't believe her at first. She's like, well, Britain abolished slavery. And Victoire's like, no, they made me work on that project at Babel. And it's this moment where, as a reader, you're like, Victoire never had a space to share this with the rest of the group before. This whole time she's been carrying that with her with nowhere to put it. Rereading my notes, that moment just took my breath away.
It's a lot. There's a lot of really heavy moments between the friends as they, in different ways, come to the realization that Babel is not maybe what it appears to be on the surface. I know Robin's is through his brother Griffin, who kind of, he instinctively just kind of helps a group of people who are trying to steal something because he's like, oh, this is going to end really badly if I don't step in at one point. And that's how he's introduced to the Hermes Society, who is kind of, it's a bunch of former students, potentially maybe people who aren't all students across the world, who are trying to undermine, as in the introduction, for how the empire is using silver to further their colonial projects. And I think that Griffin is a really interesting character as well, especially to Robin, because Robin clearly sees him as like a kind of person who he could be in some aspects. Like, this could be him, if not for a couple different things. Professor Lovell certainly sees Griffin as literally just that, like a failed experiment. But I mean, like, Robin had like a kind of early hint at Babel's alienating processes, just because Griffin basically laid down the law as he saw it about what Babel is and how it works, whereas the other students, at least not textually, at least, like, it seems like they were introduced to it later based on things they were working on or the ways they were treated in different ways.
I'm glad you brought up Griffin, because I think he's kind of the first moment where Robin realizes that there's this other perspective, and Griffin's big argument is that revolution and getting things to change at Babel is impossible without violence. And so he's basically saying that, we can't just sit down and talk about it and have people come around to our way of thinking. Violence is the only way that they will take our way of thinking seriously. And Robin is so resistant to that at first, especially because he's still at Babel and he's still enjoying all of the perks. He's not paying tuition. He's not. It's a pretty nice, if you ignore all of the evils of colonialism, he's got a really nice deal going. So he's not ready. He's kind of just straddling those two worlds, thinking of them as completely separate and just compartmentalizing. And then Griffin is this first introduction into, first of all, how Robin will ultimately start thinking by the end of the book, but also just this wider world, because Robin, I think, is at first just kind of in the phase of being enchanted by all of the opportunities he has, being away from Professor Lovell's home, being with this group of friends, his first real group of friends in his life. And then you get, the Hermes Society, and it's bringing to the forefront the idea that there are these two worlds, and kind of, I think, just the way translation ties into that as well. There's this thought that comes up repeatedly that translation is sort of an act of betrayal, sort of this thing that you can never really reconcile two different cultures and make two different experiences exactly equivalent. But all of these things kind of coming together are the two things that are really kind of tearing Robin apart that he has to figure out through the course of the novel.
As I was looking at my notes about translation and the way it works, I remember two things. First of which is that the Hermes Society, in addition to sort of direct action like stealing silver bars out of Babel, they also are a center of research. And some of that research they're just holding on to till a day where it can be published, because they're actually keeping a record of indigenous languages going extinct. One thing I love about this book is the pursuit of knowledge is not the problem. It's Babel's ties to profit that are the problem specifically. And one of the things that I remembered was actually a Wired.com UK article from 2021 about specifically how Te Heku Media, which is a Maori Nation company out of Aotearoa, New Zealand, was approached by big tech corporations in America and the US and the UK that wanted to buy the rights of all of this Maori language data from them. And Te Heku Media said, no, the only people who should have access to this, should have sovereignty over language, is our nation, and also you can't buy a language. And fundamentally, that's what Babel is trying to do. And I just wanted to point that out because some of those projects are happening in real time when we look at not just the technology of silver, but contemporary data technology as well.
I mean, there's just so much in this book to just think about. It's kind of hard to look at all of it and talk about all of it and do it justice. And I think that part of what kind of contributes to that is that there's such a great sense of verisimilitude in this. The book reads like a really engaging narrative, which it is, but also it has it has an academic feel to it. There's a lot of incredible footnotes and asides. It reads like something that is really melding that fantastical element with a historical record and making something special to comment on things that are important and difficult to talk and think about. But since we do have to kind of keep going, I think we should probably get to our two favorite characters in the book, which are, of course, Letty, our hero, and Professor Lovell, the dad of the year.
I guess we're getting to the last hour of the podcast because that is how long it will take to discuss these two characters, which we have lots of feelings
Listen,
about.
I got all day. I'm just saying.
But I guess we should start with Letty, who is certainly, I would say, a more complicated character than Professor Lovell in a lot of ways. She's someone who has truly suffered based on, the cultural time period she lives in there. She's not viewed seriously. She's viewed as maybe a resource at best in some senses, but she's not viewed as a serious scholar in the eyes of her family or other people.
I mean, she was pretty much disowned when she came to Babel
Absolutely.
Instead of marrying, because now she's no longer of use to her family in terms of, her dowry and what she could bring via family connections. She has suffered. You're right.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. My partner recently read this book, and they were cooler on Babel in general. And talking with them, one of their main criticisms was, I hated Letty from the beginning. I didn't understand why they were friends with her. I didn't see any moments where she did enough or contributed enough as a friend. Why would they keep her around? And frankly, thinking about that, I think it was pity on Victoire's part. Victoire was like, Letty doesn't fit in here. And if I don't make an effort to be kind, she will be an outcast and no one will accept her. And I don't know if Letty ever felt that. She fundamentally couldn't understand the experiences of the other three people in her group because she refused to. And she knew that without them, she had no place at Babel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that is a good point, though, that Letty, as much as we're seeing that and thinking, yeah, maybe this is a kindness on Victoire's part, I think Letty is like, you're welcome. I'm here. She shows up.
Yes.
I don't know if she's bringing a lot to it, but I think in her mind, she's like, yeah, I'm bringing enough.
She ends up betraying the group for a lot of reasons, but one of the key reasons is that, as mentioned before, she has a crush on Rami. Rami does not reciprocate these feelings, and, like, as a white woman in this period, she would be, in fact, a social benefit to Rami as a man of color.
Almost unthinkable.
Almost unthinkable for her that he would reject her. And that was one of the most, like, sort of upsetting and tragic moments of the book. I was rooting for her death. She doesn't die,
No.
but I was rooting for her death.
She lives to disappoint us another day.
Mm-hmm. There's this great thought that Robin has about Letty, which is Letty could support lobbying for change as long as it was peaceful, respectable, and civilized.
Oh,
Yeah.
so that's a great burn.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we have Professor Lovell.
Down in here.
This is the moment.
Father
All right.
of the year, of all the years.
Kathleen,
Truly.
I really want you to tell me about your favorite moment of the book.
Okay. So picture it. I'm reading Babel. It's great. I'm loving it. I'm loving that it feels like this weighty Victorian novel. You're digging into all of the experiences of the characters. But, you know, they go to Canton at this one point. It's still very interesting. But I feel like it needs a little something. And I don't know what it is until it happens big time. Which is that they are on the ship back and Robin has an ill-fated meeting with Professor Lovell in which he basically murders Professor Lovell with silver bars. And it's awesome.
Yes, Professor Lovell goes from being kind of this symbolic person who I saw after thinking about this book as he's kind of like a personification of the worst excesses of imperialism and colonialism, kind of incarnate.
Yes.
He is a kind of stereotypical man behind the curtain. Like, it's a glimpse at what do the people in power in these kinds of places, what do they believe, what do they look like, what's driving the policies. Because you get some behind the scenes looks when Robin is staying at his home where he's talking to important people in the empire about we got to get these dictionaries from these foreign languages. Women shouldn't have any rights. It's pretty funny that they think they should have rights. I think that the Chinese are fundamentally lazy and that you need to overcome your racial laziness to be good at studying.
It's also worth mentioning he fundamentally opposes labor rights.
Yes.
Which is relevant to silver working.
It's true.
Like, there's this moment where there are striking workers outside of Babel because a silver bar has been made that now several hundred people have lost their jobs in London. And, like, Victoire and Rami and Letty and Robin are all present. And they're like, is it true they lost their jobs, Professor Lovell? And he says, well, of course. The sort of labor they do is redundant now. It should have been made redundant long ago. This is simply human progress.
I mean, again, the book referencing Luddites, the Luddite movement.
The real historical movement.
Yeah.
Yep. And then the book also, with the trip to Canton, is basically, it's commentary on the opium trade, where, I mean, talk about just discussing events in history, just pushing drugs onto another country in order to extract wealth from them. Awful stuff. Lovell, he loves all of it. He loves it. He thinks it's great.
It makes him money.
It makes him money.
It gives him status.
And status. Yeah, and you know what else gives him status? Is bringing in cool sons to help him translate things at Babel.
Yep.
Because Father of the Year, again, he kind of has been going around the world, kind of sleeping with people and trying to have kids so that they can have the British gene that he might believe is necessary to civilize people and make them good at learning. He beats Robin brutally early on in their relationship when Robin gets engrossed in a book and misses part of a lesson. So he's just not a nice guy. So when he does eventually get murdered on the return trip from Canton, which Robin thankfully bungles and really sets off a not great kind of experience.
International incident.
An international incident, not favoring the British. And so when he does get murdered by Robin and stuffed in a suitcase, we're all cheering for it. It's a great moment to see this symbol of imperialism and colonialism and the worst uses of power, stuffed in a suitcase.
Die brutally.
He
now,
dies.
What I love about this murder is so often in fiction, we see the really, really fun, campy murder where it's like premeditated, everything is planned out. No. This is more like how murders tend to actually happen, which is heat of the moment, high emotions, and there is something at hand that can do the killing. Which I think was like Poor Robin, because he is torn up about this for the rest of the book. But, yeah, no, I'm glad he's dead.
Professor Lovell literally gave him the tool with
Yes,
which he was
yes,
murdered with.
he
Like, he
did.
gave him the silver bar as an object lesson, being like, this is what happens when you turn against Babel.
Almost like how Babel gave her Hermes Society and the translators who would turn against them the tool to destroy it.
Yes.
Oh, the parallelism. Yeah, I like that.
It's good stuff in this book, folks.
Can I bring up my favorite part, though?
Yes.
Please.
Which is after Robin commits this murder and he's like, oh no, what do I do? He tells his friends and no one judges him for it.
Yes.
They're just like, yeah, that sounds about right.
Letty's worried, but she's more like, we're going to get in trouble for
Yes.
doing a murder, and
Yes.
this is going to ruin our careers.
Why can't I go to the police?
Yeah.
I'm a white woman. I'd be fine. Why can't I go to the police?
And, they kind of have to sit her down and say, we're all going to get killed if you do that. You might not get killed, but we're all going to die. And she, at that point, is like, no, I don't want you to die right now.
No.
Right.
She hasn't been
changes
forced.
her mind later.
She hasn't
Yeah.
been forced to
Oh.
choose literally between her friends who have given her a sense of belonging and Babel, which is, the other sense of belonging that she's kind of had. Which leads to the ending I thought was very emotional and very powerful. Does anyone want to kind of lead that discussion?
Yeah, my partner the other day, who again was cooler on the book than me, asked me, what stuck with you when you read Babel? And the first thing that came to my mind was the ending. There's a lot that I love about the ending, from the takeover of the tower by the Hermes Society and saying, like, until you stop a certain number of practices, like, we're not going to do any translating. The silver bars are ours now. Their solidarity with the aforementioned striking workers who lost their jobs. And especially, I love the confrontation between Robin and Victoire. Robin decides the only way that I can see us making any progress is to destroy the building. And the only way to do that is for someone to be inside. And he decides he's going to be the one to do it. And Victoire says, I can't do that. What is resistance to me is living in a world that doesn't think I should. And they part ways, and they respect each other and love each other so deeply in this moment, despite the fact that they're choosing revolution in two different ways. And at the moment of Robin's death, he's thinking about his mother saying his name, and he's thinking about Rami.
I love the fact that at the end of the book, he thinks about his mother, who we only saw dying at the beginning of the book, saying his name, because we don't ever get to know what Robin's original Chinese name was. That's never mentioned in the book. That's a thing that is just for him, and it's not for the readers. It's no one else knows it. And at the end, him thinking about that really kind of, I feel, drove home a lot about what the book was trying to say about certain things, and it's very an emotional scene as Victoire kind of rides off, trying to reconcile the loss of her friends and like who she had been until recently.
Absolutely. I love how it pulls all the threads together, and it really does examine those different paths that characters have thought about taking and ultimately do take for revolution. And so it really explores how to achieve those goals through different methods, and that trajectory of Robin from saying, Griffin is wrong to I will live and die for this, and violence is the way to kind of get people to listen to my message. I just found it really is a satisfying ending, I think.
And so I think it's safe to say that we all did like this book very much, and
Yeah.
we would all recommend.
Absolutely. There's no tension in this of like, oh, really, you liked it? No, we're all
No.
absolutely
We're
like,
all-
it was
we're
so
all
great.
on board. We think you should probably go read it. Go get yourself a copy. So we're about done here at Book Solid. I think that we've got some recommendations from Kat for read-alikes for Babel.
That's right. The first one I want to recommend is a lesser-known fantasy novel. It's called A Stranger in Olandria. It's by Sofia Samatar. It's about a young man who grows up in a country without literacy, and when he's gifted the language of reading, which comes from a nearby empire, he travels there and is enchanted until he sees the darker side of this empire. It is also a book that ends in a revolution. It is profoundly interested in language, and I would recommend it to those especially who are interested in poetic and beautiful writing. I would also recommend, if you cried at the end of Babel and would like to cry some more, that you read The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, which is the first book in a trilogy, which is examining a lot of similar issues to Babel, such as labor, race, and empire. And finally, I would recommend the short story collection, Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang, specifically the titular story, The Story of Your Life and Others, which was adapted into the film Arrival, which is another science fiction look at translation, except this time it's about a translator who is tasked with learning how to communicate with an alien species, to make sure that they're not planning anything militant.
Thank you.
I was so happy to be on today. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. It was really great to have even more people to talk about it with, because I've probably bored James.
Never boring. Not even a little bit. What are we reading next?
All right, so next we have a YA novel in verse. I heard you're a big YA reader.
You know, I've read quite a bit of YA recently, and I'd like to read something that's good.
Oh, okay.
This next episode might be spicy, so I will be listening.
Exactly. All right. Well, I think you should like it because there are some fantasy elements. That's right.
That's good.
More fantasy for the Book Solid
mark.
podcast. And this was actually a National Book Award finalist in 2021. So it's called Me Moth by Amber McBride. It's a novel in verse, so the language is really beautiful, and I'm going to just give a very brief overview because I think actually the less you know going in, the better. But it's a girl named Moth. She lost her family in an accident. Now she lives with her aunt. She's very lonely until she meets a new boy at school, and they kind of end up going on this road trip. So it's a road trip novel, coming of age story, love story. It's got Navajo creation myths, hoodoo, a lot of things going on, beautifully written, and I'm excited to discuss it with you.
Now that sounds really interesting. I'm excited to read this.
All right.
Thank you for listening, everyone, to this episode of Book Solid, and we hope that you'll listen to our next one.